James left his phone inside, face up on the kitchen table, and it buzzed once while Ms. Diep stood in the garden. The screen flashed an office notification, then went dark. She didn't move, because the last time a buzz arrived without warning, she had gone silent and left to protect the girls. Behind her, basil smelled sharp in the sun, and Nye's small watering cup tipped in careful hands. If a family finally gets a calm day, what rule keeps that calm from being stolen? Silence or structure? Share your thoughts in the comments. That morning had started with sunlight. Hello and welcome back. Peace can feel safe until a single buzz makes the shoulders remember. The same sunlight warmed the basil beds as Ms. Diep stepped into the garden with tea. Yet James left his phone on the kitchen table, face up like a quiet witness. Nye followed with her stuffed orange and announced, "I will help." Ms. Diep handed her the smallest watering cup. "2 plants only," she said, "then you stop."
Okay.
Nye watered the lime sapling, then the green onions, and whispered, "Grow good, okay?" Ms. Diep hummed without noticing, and the house stayed still. The last time a buzz arrived without warning, Ms. Diep had gone silent and left to protect the girls. Today, she wanted calm to stay, but the same hope still needed structure.
Okay.
So James stepped outside with coffee and watched them for a moment. "You two are running agriculture," he said. Nye lifted her chin. "Mom is boss. I am assistant boss." James nodded. "Then I'm just delivery." Ms. Diep laughed, and the sound warmed her chest. Yet James's eyes flicked once toward the phone inside, because calm was never a wish. It was a practice. "I'll be back for lunch if the calendar behaves," he said. Don't promise if it's a trap," she warned gently. Before he left, he asked, "Any weird messages?" "None." "Any strangers around the gate?" "No." Because of that practiced normal, James took the phone into his hand before leaving, not to scroll, only to scan for danger.
You're doing a great job too.
He exhaled like breath returning to his body. Then he knelt in front of Nye. "Rules?" he asked. Nye recited serious. "Hold hands, no strangers, no pictures, tell Mom." James smiled. "Perfect." He pocketed the phone, tapped the gate latch once like a ritual, and drove away like the day was normal. Diep watched the road swallow the car, then turned back to the garden, keeping her hands busy because hands do not panic when they have a job. Yet the same need for anchors followed Ms. Diep to Hill Fruits, where the front counter ran smoother than it had in weeks. Luan ran the counter behind the fruit crates,
Something's wrong.
greeting customers with easy confidence.
Nothing here.
Are you sure?
Diep checked the cold unit gauge, then the temperature log board, then the seal code sheets. One neat line of proof after another. Mr. Hung stopped by and scanned the stack of delivery boxes. "Organized," he said. "That's the goal," Ms. Diep replied. Mr. Hung looked at Nye on a stool, eating fruit like she had earned it. "She's healthy," he observed.
The basil looks
"She's strong, Ms. Diep said. Mr. Hung's mouth softened. "Good," he answered. Like that was the only win worth keeping. But the same word good can tempt people to get careless, and James refused to let it. In a fluorescent meeting room, he ran the ops review with short questions and clean answers, supply updates, delivery schedules, training completion, and secure folders for weekly uploads. When someone suggested, maybe we should post something inspirational about our founder story, James shut it down without heat. No, he said, we post performance, not family. He let the silence settle, then added, privacy is a risk control. The room went quiet again, and then pens moved, because a boundary spoken like policy becomes policy. Because of that discipline, the procurement director's call felt like a reward earned, not a gift. James hit speaker. Your week 2 logs are perfect, the voice said. No discrepancies. We're approving your scale-up. Shati. James didn't celebrate. He asked, timeline? Next week, procurement replied. We also want to highlight your documentation as a best practice model. James paused to make the boundary visible. Highlight internally, he said, measured. Not publicly. Understood, procurement answered. He requested the escalation contact list and got it in writing. When the call ended, James typed one line into his notes, keep it boring. Then he slid the phone into his pocket, where it could not steal his face. But the same whispered joy had to stay small. So Ms. Diep answered the news with a smile when James appeared at noon. He carried takeout soup and fruit buns, and his eyes looked tired but happy. He nodded at Luan, then went straight to Ms. Diep in the back room like the shop had its own gravity. Scale up approved, he whispered. That means the system is holding, she said. James nodded. It's holding because you built it. Luan overheard and made a gagging sound. Stop being romantic in my shop, he complained. James laughed, and the room felt like sunlight again. Then the phone vibrated in James's pocket, a warning, so he didn't open it there. He finished lunch, kissed Nai's head, and returned to the office, keeping the wind inside his ribs. The same vibration followed him into the afternoon, and the truth inside it arrived sharper than expected. James opened the notification in his office with the door closed. It wasn't procurement. It was an email labeled Brand Trust Assets, optional, attaching a release form and a request for family moment photos near the Hill Fruits gate. The note underneath tried to sound friendly. Authentic builds trust. James didn't argue with the tone. He documented the boundary. He forwarded the email to procurement with one sentence. Not permitted under terms. Then he locked the phone and set it face down, as if that could stop the outside world from leaning in. Yet the same tightness followed Ms. Diep home, where she chose banana bread as a quiet repair instead of a worry spiral. Nai stirred batter with flour on her nose and told a long story about the garden plants talking. Then asked if the lime sapling would miss her. It stays because it's cared for, Moose, Diep said, and felt the words turn inward. That day, Ms. Diep had gone silent and left felt unfinished, tied to cameras, strangers, and a message she kept. When James came home later, the house smelled sweet. He paused in the doorway and said softly, "This is what I want." Ms. Diep handed him a slice. "Then eat," she told him, and watched his shoulders drop. But the same phone refused to stay quiet, and it buzzed from the kitchen while they stood in the garden beside the basil. So James went inside alone and read under the warm light, keeping the screen away from the children's rooms. The invite wasn't a simple visit. On-site visit request, tomorrow, required. Content liaison attending. James returned to the doorway, face controlled, and held up the phone like evidence. Many homes learn this slowly. Calm lasts only when boundaries stay boring and consistent. What small rule has helped protect a family when good news starts inviting curious eyes? Then the final line loaded, and James's thumb stopped. Gate area walkthrough requested. But the same final line, gate area walkthrough requested, glowed on James's phone while Basil brushed Ms. Diep's wrist. So James carried the phone back into the kitchen and set it beside the cooling banana bread face up. Because the request touched the gate, Ms. Diep felt the old impulse to disappear, then chose words instead. James' mother stood in the doorway and saw the change in her face. "Is it happening again?" she asked. It's trying," James answered, steady. Ms. Diep looked at the phone and finally paid off the mystery in her throat. "The day Ms. Diep went silent and left," she said, "a man offered money for one harmless family clip. When Ms. Diep refused, he promised he could get it anyway." James's mother's hands tightened on the dish towel. "I didn't know," she whispered. James covered Ms. Diep's hand. "Nobody buys access," he said. "Not anymore." Yet the same phone still held a second loop, so James did not let the story end with confession. That's why he called procurement on speaker before sleep softened resolve. Because proof mattered more than comfort, he asked for names, IDs, zones, and a written scope with no content liaison. The coordinator's voice stayed professional. "The visit is for operations verification only," she said. "No filming, no family, no gate walkthrough required." James replied, "Then send that in writing tonight." An email arrived within minutes, and Officer Thu, invited over quietly, photographed the screen and saved the thread. "Good," she said. "Now the paper says what the mouth cannot twist." Ms. Diep exhaled, but the loop stayed alive. Someone had tried to slip authentic back into the deal, because that word authentic still haunted the kitchen air. Morning began with rules instead of worry, but the same calm had to be carried to Hill Fruits, so the phone traveled in James's pocket. Locked. That's why Ms. Diep prepared the pack house like a clean corridor. Visitor log, badge tray, and the privacy notice at eye level. Luan taped a simple sign beside the crates. Operations only. No photos. Anna lined her care cards under the stitched cloth at home and chose one to bring. Safe line, no crossing. James's mother stayed with Nai, practicing steadiness with pancakes and quiet stories. Before the van arrived, Ms. Diep pressed her palm to the lime sapling soil and whispered, "Stay." The plants did not answer, but the house inside her did. But the same van tires on gravel made the day feel sharper, and the phone's earlier email became the only thing that mattered. So James greeted the visitors at the line, not at the gate, and held out the printed scope from procurement. Because compliance is a shield, the quality auditor read, signed the log, and accepted a badge. The audit moved cleanly. Batch sheets, seal codes, temperature board, handoff zones, exactly the kind of boring James demanded. Then a second person stepped forward with a content badge and a small camera bag, smiling too warmly. "We won't use faces," she said. "Just authentic atmosphere near the gate." James did not raise his voice. "Not permitted," he answered. Officer Thu stepped in, calm. "Show authorization," she said. The woman hesitated, and the room tightened. Yet the same hesitation was proof, so James tightened the loop instead of arguing. That's why he called the coordinator back and put the phone on speaker, where everyone could hear. Because accountability must be public to the room, he asked, "Did you authorize a content liaison on site?" The coordinator's tone sharpened. "No," she said. "That is not approved. Please send her off the property." The content liaison's smile cracked. "It's optional," she tried. James pointed to the printed scope. "So is leaving," he said. Luan opened the side door without drama, simply showing the exit. Officer Thu recorded the badge number and photographed the camera bag. "Trespass if she returns," she said. The liaison left, and the auditor cleared his throat. "Proceed," he said, and the audit resumed. Because the audit resumed, relief arrived briefly, but it came with a new sting. The van did not drive away after signing out, but the same phone thread gave a path, so Officer Thu walked to the fence line with James and did not step onto the road. That's why the next move was still boring. A clear boundary spoken once on record. Across the street, the van's window cracked open and a lens lifted. Officer Thu raised her hand. "Stop recording," she said. James held up the signed scope and said, "Operations only. No photos. No gate." The driver pretended not to hear. Officer Thu read the notice aloud and added, "Next step is citation." The lens lowered. It wasn't dramatic, but it kept the peace. Yet the same contract could not rely on street warnings forever, so procurement closed the gap with a new object. So an updated addendum arrived by email and then by courier that afternoon. 1 page, signatures, and 1 bold line. Private by default. Because the addendum resolved what fear could not, James carried the page into Hill Fruits like it was the cleanest proof of the week. He placed it in Ms. Lai Tu Diep's hands and said, "This is armor." Ms. Lai Tu Diep traced the words once, then folded the page and slid it into the binder where the seal code sheets lived. James's mother watched and whispered, "That's the first time paper has felt like kindness." James answered, "Kindness that can be enforced." The loop tightened toward closure. If anyone tried again, the partnership itself would push back. Because of that paper, the day could finally turn warm without feeling naive. But the same family still needed a closing ritual. So Ms. Lai Tu Diep returned to the garden at dusk. That's why banana bread cooled on the counter while basil was trimmed with gentle pinches. Nai watered 2 plants only, then stopped proudly, as instructed. Anna taped her care card to the inside of the pantry door. Safe line. No crossing. James's mother reheated pancakes and set out small plates, smiling without apology. James locked his phone in a drawer and left it there overnight. Under the porch light, Ms. Lai Tu Diep touched the lime sapling and felt steady life under her fingers. James stood beside her and said, "Safe can be built." Ms. Lai Tu Diep nodded. Safe can be kept, she replied. If a quiet boundary ever protected a home, what simple habit helped it hold?